Well, thank you for joining us for How to Buy a Telescope. This is something we've been doing for a number of years in November, prior to the Christmas season when a lot of first telescopes are bought. Let's let this guy in. Okay. My name is Jeff Robertson, and with me is Clayton Knoll, and we're both members of the RASC in Edmonton. So we will get going here. I just have to share my screen, and we'll just be kind of doing a tag team between myself and Clayton, and maybe Alistair might have some things to say too.
Just don't raise my hackles.
Okay. All right. Okay. Let's wait for that bar to get out of the way in my view here. This is being recorded. We will put it on YouTube later on. Okay, so how to buy a telescope for November 30th, 2023. Or how not to buy a hobby killer telescope, which a lot of people have bought in the past. They find them very, very difficult to use, and they end up sitting in a closet. First off, we'll talk about the three types of telescopes. There are refractors, which uses lenses. There are reflectors, which use mirrors. And then there are compound telescopes, or catadioptric, it's the proper name for them, and they use mirrors and lenses. So we'll go with the first type, the refractor. And this is your classic telescope with a lens on the front and an eyepiece on the back. Light comes in the front and is focused into the eyepiece at the back. The very first astronomical telescopes were refractors, the kind that Galileo used. The advantage of a refractor is it is a sealed unit. It doesn't require collimation. We'll talk about that a little bit later. If it's well taken care of, a refractor will last a lifetime. The disadvantage is the bigger the lens, the more expensive it gets. In terms of price per inch, refractors are the most expensive of the telescopes out there. There are various types of refractors. The most expensive kind are what we call achromatic refractors, and they have several elements of glass in the lens, and they eliminate color fringing. And then there are achromatics, which do have a little bit of color fringing, but they are still very, very usable. Unfortunately, a lot of the hobby killer telescopes are also refractors, and we'll talk about those a little bit later. The next is the reflector, or the Newtonian reflector, invented by Sir Isaac Newton. Early refractor telescopes were very bad for color fringing. The reflector that he invented eliminated that. And as you can see in this animation, the light comes in the front. The mirror is at the bottom of the scope. It reflects the light back to what is called a secondary mirror, which is positioned near the front of the scope at an angle, a 45-degree angle, and it directs the light into the eyepiece. The advantages of a reflector is you can get a fairly large aperture for little cost when you compare it with a refractor. All the big telescopes on Earth, all the big professional observatories are reflector telescopes that use mirrors. And the last kind is a compound telescope, which uses a lens at the front, sometimes called a corrector plate. The light comes through the front, is focused down upon the mirror in the back. The light then bounces back off that mirror to a secondary, which is affixed to the back of the corrector plate, and then back again through the hole in the mirror into the eyepiece. Advantages of a compound telescope is you can have a fairly large aperture in a fairly compact package because the light path is folded. An 8-inch reflector telescope is about 4.5 feet long, where a compound telescope is about 2 feet long. So they're very, very compact. However, they are more expensive than a reflector, but not as expensive as a refractor with the same aperture. So, 4 things we look for when we're buying a telescope. And the first one is aperture, which is how big is the lens or the mirror in the telescope. That is the most important thing. The bigger the aperture, the more light you gather, the more you're going to see, the better the image quality. The next is the magnification. In hobby killer telescopes, magnification is what they stress the most. It is not as important as aperture, and actually magnification is all of a function of the eyepiece you use. You can have a huge telescope with very little magnification if you use a certain kind of eyepiece. And conversely, you can have a very small telescope with a theoretically huge magnification number with an eyepiece, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. The next is the mount. You need a very, very steady mount. Telescopes look at a very small piece of the sky, very small, what we call a field of view. And it's not like looking through a toilet paper tube or a paper towel tube. It's more like looking through a straw or even down the barrel of a pen. You're looking at a very, very small piece of sky. And if your mount is wobbly and unsteady, it's going to shake all over. You're going to have a very difficult time aiming the telescope. And once you find your target, keeping it on the target. And the last thing are accessories. And accessories are like Finderscope, extra eyepieces, and such. So aperture, as I said, size matters. The more aperture you have, the more light gathering power you have. As I said before, you can see fainter objects, you can resolve smaller objects, you can magnify the view with a large aperture telescope. 60 millimeter refractor will not give you as good a view as, say, a 70 millimeter refractor, just because that extra 10 millimeters will allow you to gather that much more light. And you'll be able to make out smaller details. Say you want to look at Saturn, for example. In a 60 millimeter refractor, yes, you can see the rings, but you're pretty much just going to see a ring. With a larger aperture telescope, you'll be able to see that there's not just one ring, there's 3 visible rings, and there's also a gap, which we call the Cassini division, between what we call the A and the B ring. You're not going to see that in a telescope with a smaller aperture. You need a bigger aperture. And if you're looking at the moon, if you want to see smaller and smaller craters, you need a bigger aperture to see that. So the common apertures in a refractor are 3-inch, 4-inch, 5-inch. By the time you're talking 6-inch, you're talking a lot of money for that. And of course, there's the 2-inch or the 60 millimeter hobby killer refractor also. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. In reflectors, the common sizes for the mirror are, I'll just let that guy in, 4.5-inch or 114 millimeter, 6-inch or 150 millimeter, 8-inch or 200 millimeter. Those are common sizes for a starter reflector, and then you can get in your 10, 12, 14, and 16-inch if you want to spend more money. For the for the compound telescopes, 3.5-inch, 5-inch, 6-inch, 8-inch are very common. 9.25-inch are starting to be common. when you get into 9.25 and 10-inch, you're starting to get up there in price, and 14 and 16-inch are quite a bit more money. They're not really what you would think of for a starter telescope. So smaller apertures have a lower cost. Larger apertures have a higher cost. Smaller apertures are lighter because glass weighs a lot, whether it's a mirror or a lens. Glass weighs a lot. And for the higher apertures, when you're talking about 10, 12, 14, 16-inch mirrors, you're starting to pack along a lot of weight for these telescopes. So there are the most common sizes for refractors, reflectors, and compounds for what we call starter telescopes. Now, magnification is determined by the eyepiece, and as the slide says, the rule of thumb for maximum magnification is 50 times magnification per inch of aperture. So theoretically, a 3-inch telescope, whether a reflector or a refractor, will give you a maximum magnification of 150 power. Now, this is a theoretical magnification because we do look through an atmosphere. Our atmosphere is moving, it's roiling, and it's got dust and such, pollen and stuff floating around in there, water vapor, and that tends to distort the view. So you might only get 100 power out of a 3-inch scope. For a 10-inch scope, theoretically, you can get 500 power. My biggest scope is an 8-inch. So technically, I could get 400 power. I've never gone for 400 power. Actually, the most magnification I've ever used in that is 200, and I'm quite happy with that. I have eyepieces that will get me that high, but I've never used them. So it is, like I say, it's a theoretical magnification. And as I just said, the atmosphere generally doesn't permit the high magnification in those scopes. And this is an important fact that lower magnification does show greater detail than higher magnification in a lot of cases. Because the more you push the power on a telescope, the dimmer the image is. The exit pupil is smaller. It's just the nature of the beast. The higher the power, the dimmer the image is going to be. So let's talk about mounts. There are 3 kinds of mounts. There's the Alt-Az mount on the left, the Dobsonian mount, which is actually an Alt-Az mount, but it's strictly used on reflector telescopes. And then there's the equatorial mount, which is, or also called a GEM, or a German equatorial mount. These have to be aligned precisely with the North geographic pole of the Earth, or if you happen to be in the southern hemisphere, the South geographic pole. So let's look at an Alt-Az mount. There's 2 kinds. There's a manual mount, and then there's a tracking mount. Basically, they act just like a camera tripod. They tilt up and down, and they swing left to right. So if you're wanting to look at something, you point the telescope as you would a camera on a tripod at that object, and that's pretty much all there is to it. A particular mount shown on the left has what we call slow motion controls for making finer adjustments. There's also tracking mounts. These are motorized mounts that are Alt-Az. And they will come with a hand controller. And typically you find these on what we call go-to telescopes, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. But again, they tilt up and down, and they swing left to right, and you point them at what you want to look at. And there you go. And they're a good mount for a starter scope. Definitely a good mount. The next is the Dobsonian mount. And what this is, it's a very simple mount. It was invented by a guy by the name of John Dobson, who would do sidewalk astronomy down in San Francisco. He'd haul this reflector telescope out onto the street in San Francisco and offer people views of the moon and planets. And he came up with a very simple mount made out of wood, where the telescope would rotate on Teflon bearings on a base plate and then swing up and down again on Teflon bearings on the side. And you would balance the scope out in the mount, and it would be very easy to set up. It takes minutes to set one of these things up, and you're off observing. And as the object moves, is because the Earth is rotating, you just gently push the telescope along. And a properly made Dobsonian mount is very, very easy to push without much resistance. Sometimes called a push-to mount. And in our computerized age, someone has come up with a tracking mount for Dobsonian telescopes. I don't have one of these. I think Clayton does, but correct me if I'm wrong.
No, mine's still a push to.
Oh, is it? Okay, all right.
Jay has the big Skywatcher that has the go-to mount on it.
Oh, okay, all right.
Probably very similar to the one you're looking at on the right there.
Yeah. There's two types of these that I've heard of for tracking, and they have little motors inside that will you align on an object and it will just track it. And there's another type that doesn't have motors. It's still a push-to, but you align it and tell it what it's where you are, what time it is, what you're looking at, and it will give you instructions on a handset to push to. Well, after you tell it what you want to look at, say you want to look at Venus or something, and it would tell you, okay, push it left, up. Okay, you're on it, and it's still a push to. It doesn't have any motors, but it is kind of a go-to.
Yeah,
kind of telescope.
that is exactly what mine. It's called a telescope, and it's a push to, but you have to do an alignment, which basically is point it vertical, hit the button on the controller, pick any two stars you want, as long as they're not close together but further apart. Once you got those centered, you push the button, and then according to that, you pick your target, say the Andromeda Galaxy at M31. So it will then give you alt-azimuth coordinates on your little hand controller, and then you push and either lower or raise the scope until you get both numbers to 0. Once you get those numbers on 0, you are supposed to be looking at the Andromeda Galaxy.
Okay, all right. Well, I've never used one, but that knowledge just comes from what I've read about them. So, yeah. But they're a good mount also, and a Dobsonian telescope is a good starter telescope. Then there's the equatorial mount, the German equatorial mount. And these, as I said, have to be aligned with geographic north. They do have a counterweight because the telescope is off center from it's not on the center of gravity of the tripod. So you need a counterweight to keep this thing steady. We don't recommend these for starter scopes because they're counterintuitive to use. If you don't have them precisely aligned with the north geographic pole, say you just plunked it down and it happens to be pointed east or west, trying to get it to point at what you want can be quite maddening. You think it's you're moving toward the target, but the scope is actually pointing above the target or below the target. And if you try and counter it with the other controller, there's two controllers, one for declination, one for right ascension. It's just very maddening to use if it's not precisely aligned. And so we don't recommend equatorial mounts for our first scope, because they do take a bit of a learning curve to learn. And generally on what we call hobby killer scopes, the EQ mounts are not very good. They're generally fairly lightweight, and they're a lot of times they're really wobbly too. So I did a little video with an equatorial mount in the basement. So I'm just going to play it here. Sound isn't great, but what are you going to do? This is a 4-inch Newtonian reflector telescope that's typical of a lot of starter scopes, and it is on what we call a hobby killer mount, which is an equatorial mount. But before I start, those of you who know telescopes may notice something wrong with the way I've got this set up. It's upside down. I don't know how many times I've seen displays or had people bring one of these things in, either on an equatorial mount or an alt-az mount, where they've got it upside down because they think the eyepiece goes at the bottom. On a Newtonian reflector, the eyepiece goes on the top. So let's fix that first. Okay, we've got this set up now properly with the eyepiece at the top, and you can probably see, looking down the tube, you can see the 4-inch mirror at the bottom of the tube. Light comes in the front, comes back, bounces off this thing in the middle of the secondary out to the eyepiece. So let's look at what makes this a hobby killer. First off, it has to be aligned with the north geographic pole, and it has to be aligned along this axis here. We're at 53 degrees north latitude here in Edmonton, so there is a gauge where you would set the latitude adjustment. But unless this thing is pointing due north, it's not going to track. It's not going to track at all. How you move it is with these slow motion controls in right ascension and declination. So if you have the scope properly aligned, you can track an object by slowly turning these knobs. And like most hobby killers, this scope also comes with a really crappy finder. But the thing that really stands out in these hobby killer scopes, not just an equatorial mount, but also alt-az, cheap alt-az mounts, is how wobbly they are. So I've got my laser pointer pointed at the wall here, so I'm just going to move the scope here, and you can see just how wobbly it is. It takes a long time to settle down, and even in a wind, it just shakes a lot. And telescopes have a very narrow field of view, so any movement is going to be really noticeable. And if I just go and look in it or mess with the focus, it's shaking all over the place, as you can see. So that's a hobby killer equatorial mount in a nutshell. And in that picture I took off the internet for the Beware, they actually do have it upside down. Accessories: a finder scope, eyepieces, and a collimation tool for reflectors only. I mentioned the very narrow field of view. A finder scope is a small, wide field, low power telescope that mounts on top of the telescope, and you do have to align it with the view that the main telescope is seeing in order for it to be effective. Generally, finder scopes will have a crosshairs in the middle of it. I find the best way to align a finder scope, particularly in the city, if you can see a tall building, it's going to have a red aircraft anti-collision light on the top. And you put your main scope on that light, and then and center it, and then you align your finder scope with that light. You can also use a distant tree, the tip of a different distant tree if there don't happen to be any tall buildings around. There's also something called a red dot finder, which is it's a one power finder. It's a naked eye device, and it projects a tiny red dot with an LED onto a transparent screen, usually made out of plastic. And again, it does have adjustments to align that red dot with the center view of your telescope, but you really need a good finder. If you have a telescope and you do not have a finder scope on it, you're going to have a very difficult time finding anything through that. You might be able to find the moon, but a good finder is absolutely necessary. So these are the types of finder scopes. On the left are proper finder scopes, small telescopes. I recommend, particularly for older people with our bad backs and stuff, to get a right angle finder scope. That was the first thing I bought after I got my 8-inch Schmidt-Kasser, and it had a scope on the left lower one, a straight through scope. But if I happen to be looking at something almost straight overhead, I had to contort myself to be able to look through it. It's just not for me. I'm a big guy. I'm 6'4", and I'm old, and my back hurts, and I just couldn't do the contortion. So I went out and bought a right angle finder scope, and it's just a lot easier. On the right hand side are what are the red finder scopes. They have you put a battery inside of them, and they project a little red dot on on a screen. I've got one behind me. I might bring it out after when we finish the PowerPoint. And then the one in the lower right is same idea, just a different design. And you can see knobs on this one here. This is for adjusting right here, adjusting the scope or the red dot up and down and side to side. Eyepieces. And eyepieces are what determine the magnification, also determine the field of view, and they're interchangeable. And they come in all sorts of different focal lengths. And the focal length of the eyepiece determines, with the focal length of the telescope, determines what your magnification is. For example, my 8-inch is got a 2000 millimeter focal length. So if I put a 20 millimeter eyepiece in it, you divide the focal length of the telescope by the focal length of the eyepiece to get your magnification. So a 20 millimeter eyepiece and a 2000 millimeter telescope will give you a 100 power magnification. Come in 3 barrel sizes, 0.965 inches, 1 1/4, and 2-inch. 0.965 inches today are all garbage. Back in the day, maybe there were some very good ones, but today, if you've got a telescope with a 9.65 or 0.965 eyepiece, it's probably a piece of, it's not very good. 1 1/4 inch are the most common size. If you buy a reputable telescope, it's going to come with a 1 1/4 inch eyepiece holder. Some eyepiece holders have an adapter. They're actually a 2-inch focuser, but they have a 1 1/4 inch eyepiece adapter. So you can use a 2-inch eyepiece. 2-inch eyepieces are great, but they are expensive. I've never seen a cheap 2-inch eyepiece. In fact, most 2-inch eyepieces will cost about the same or even more than a fairly good 6-inch Dobsonian telescope. There's several $100s, and of course you don't want to drop one either. You can buy a good telescope, and I've seen this. I've seen good telescopes, and they come with really crappy eyepieces. But the good news is you can buy good eyepieces. Lots of people sell them. There's a shop here in Edmonton that sells them. And a good eyepiece can make a good eyepiece perform better, and a good eyepiece can make a not so good telescope adequate. Good eyepieces are much heavier than cheap eyepieces. A good eyepiece is typically have a 4-element lens or even more. Cheap eyepieces maybe have 2 elements, or they might not even be made out of glass, maybe made out of plastic. And these are examples of poor quality eyepieces. But like I say, you can buy a nice 8-inch on a DAW, 8-inch reflector on a DAW, a great telescope. A telescope will last you your whole life, and it'll come with poor eyepieces because they want to keep the cost down. So go out and buy yourself some good eyepieces. And these are examples of better eyepieces. You can see them on the right hand side. They're bigger, they're bulkier, and they're just better to have. Better to have. And then there is a collimation tool which you need if you have a reflector telescope. And I'll let Clayton talk about that. Do you want to put your own slides up?
Yeah, I'll put my collimation slides up now.
Okay. I will stop my share here.
Because there's a couple different ways to do collimation on a telescope. If you do get your scope, what it's going to have when you start out, which will come with the scope, is something just like that. That's the collimation cap, just a little plastic, kind of looks like an eyepiece. You set it down into your eyepiece, you look through the hole, and then you go through the alignments by making the mirrors kind of overlay on top of one another. To me, when I started using my scope, it just was too difficult to make it, to get what I wanted out of it. So somebody suggested moving on to what they call a laser. Oh, there's a collimation cap. That's where you put it. So when you put it into your scope, that's where you're putting it in. And then you do your adjustments on the secondary mirror first. But here's the laser collimator. You can see it there on the right-hand side. Basically, it's just a red laser. You insert it in your eyepiece, and you have that little target thing facing the back of the telescope. When you put that into the telescope, you look down the front of the scope at the mirror, and all reflectors, a decent reflector telescope, the big primary mirror in the bottom is going to have a little circle in the center of the square of the mirror. And what you want to do is, by adjusting your secondary mirror to have the telescopes, the red dot line up inside that circle, and you just tighten everything down with that center screw. Now that you got that done, you just move over to the back of the scope where the big mirror is, and then on that particular scope, you can see it has a cooling mirror or fan attached to it to help cool down the telescope. Now what you do is you look back at that target up reticule, and you'll see a red dot somewhere in that particular area of the target. What you want to do is, by tweaking those mirror adjustments, moving the mirror, you want to get the red dot to line up dead center right in there. Once you do that, you've canceled out, the red dot will disappear and it'll just be black. Now you got your telescope aligned. It's now going to be usable, and it will give you really good images of what you're going to be looking at. To me, it is the best way to go. It's very quick. It takes me no more than about 2 minutes And that's after it's been transported, carried around, beaten up. And it's the mirrors are all out of alignment. And so it takes me about 2 minutes using the laser collimator to get my mirror back in alignment. And that's even if I have to basically start from scratch with the primary, which is screwing in those big screws here. These are the locking screws. These are the adjustment screws. You turn these all the way clockwise until they're all tight. You back them off 2 turns, and then you start your alignment and the collimation. And to me, 2-3 minutes, and I'm done. It's all set, ready to go. There's my scope. It's a big Daub. It's got a 12-inch mirror on that. It's what they call a truss mount. So these trusses are, instead of, if this thing was a full tube, it would be pretty heavy, and I'd have to have even a bigger vehicle than I got right now to get that in. So this way it comes apart. This and these are all 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces, and that makes it work for me. I can put it in carrying cases and away I go. Well, that's what I had there. So the collimation is something you have to do with a reflector. If you're not going to get any good views. That's the downside to having one of those scopes. And to me, you're going to get a very good image. I've got a 12-inch mirror, so I'm drawing in a lot of light. And like Jeff said, most beginners on a reflector like this one here would probably start with either a 6 or an 8-inch, which is a single tube, but it's fairly light and it's not that big. And still got to be collimated. And a laser collimator is probably the best way to go, even though some people say, well, it's not as accurate as using the cap, but the cap could take you a lot longer to do. So other than that, I think that's all I got on collimation.
Okay, great. Thanks. Are there any questions so far before we get too far into this?
I've been writing down several, but I don't want to ruin the flow, so I don't know when.
Oh, okay.
Sense,
All right. All right. Well, you can save them. We can go back, I guess.
Sounds good.
And we'll try and answer them. If we can't, we'll make something up.
That sounds good to me.
All right.
Let me know when you want to get into your hobby killer section. I've got
Oh,
my
okay,
hobby
sure.
killer.
Yeah, you've got your video too, right?
Well, I didn't do a video because I couldn't get the audio to go right. So I just took a picture of the damn thing and a picture of it, and also the box that came in.
Oh, okay. All right, sure. Okay. Gotcha. All right, so we did collimation, so I'm just going to skip through there. Okay.
Just go back one there, Jeff.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Okay, what you're seeing on the bottom left is using the collimation cap is what you're trying to do with the looking through the eyepiece. So by moving everything around, you're trying to get it to, you probably start off in the left-hand position. After some secondary mirror adjustments, you're probably looking at the center picture. And then on the right, you're looking at the primary once it's correctly, after you've adjusted it. And like I said, you're having to go back and forth from the front of the scope to the back of the scope, look through the eyepiece. So you're doing a lot of running around while you're actually using the collimation cap. Whereas with the laser pointer on the right there, as you can see, once you got the dot in the center of the mirror, then you can stay down at the bottom of the primary and keep moving around until you get those red dots on the target, right dead center in the middle of your target. So to me, it's a quicker and better way to set it up. Okay, thanks, Jay or Jeff.
Okay. Right. So characteristics of the hobby killer. Wobbly mount. Now, usually an equatorial mount, but I have a a very, very wobbly alt azimuth out in the garage that I bought when we used to do these things in person. And I would find them on Kijiji and buy them for $20 to $30 and bring them and show people. This is why I was on Kijiji for $20 or $30 because it's no good. The 0.965 eyepiece. It is a poor quality eyepiece, particularly in this day and age. 100 years ago, they did make good eyepieces in that size, but not anymore.
Usually plastic.
Yeah, and they're usually plastic. And then an undersized or unusable Finderscope, that reflector that I had in my video, it would be on par with something you used to get in a box of cereal when I was a kid. They're just not very good at all. And this one's very important. It claims a high magnification on the packaging. I tell people if you're looking at a telescope and you see the box that it comes in, and if magnification's on the box, run away. It's no good. Because a reputable telescope maker is not going to push magnification, because magnification is a function of the eyepiece. They're always going to push aperture. Also, a brand not associated with telescopes. And I've had people come and say, I got this National Geographic telescope. A National Geographic still is, I guess, a fine magazine, but they don't know anything about making telescopes. Or the Discovery Channel, which way, way back when it started was a science channel, but now they just have crap on there. But okay, but they don't know anything about telescopes. Vivitar. Vivitar makes very good camera flashes. They don't make very good telescopes. Stuff like that. Bushnell, who make pretty good binoculars, but their telescopes are usually not very good. So a brand not associated with telescopes. We'll talk about telescope brands in a second. And an outrageous box, and those are the ones that have the big nice colors and pictures of galaxies and planets and stuff like that. That's a sign that the telescope inside isn't very good. And here are some outrageous hobby killer boxes. 675 power, the hokey 675 EQ. And that looks like a 60 millimeter refractor. And you got the Ring Nebula, you got
Horse head.
The horse head, you got Pluto, which
No chance.
no.
Well,
You can't see that in there. And then the one above it for $349, again, 675, and that's another 114 millimeter reflector. So stay away from those. Bad.
Yeah, you're not going to see the tower, whatever that, the Tower of Creation or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
A good telescope is going to come in a box that looks like that, a brown cardboard box, and it might have the name of the guy who made it on the outside, but that's about it. It's not going to have pictures. It's not going to talk about features. It's just going to be a box, right? That's what good telescopes come in. This must be a daub, because I see another box underneath it, which is probably the bottom part of the mount.
Yeah.
So what do you want? You want something with at least a 3-inch aperture, so 76 to 80 millimeter. The largest aperture that's practical. Are you going to be hauling this thing around? As I say, the bigger the telescope, the heavier it is. A 4-inch telescope is fairly lightweight. It's easy to move around. A 12-inch telescope, not so easy. You want a sturdy mount. You don't want one that shakes and shimmies and is hard to point at. You want 1 1/4-inch eyepieces, and good 1 1/4-inch eyepieces. You also want a very good finder. You don't want a very small finder. You want a good quality finder. And again, I prefer a right angle finder. It's just easier to work with. And you want a telescope from a reputable manufacturer, a company that is known for making telescopes. Most of all, you want a telescope that's going to work for you. Like if you're going to have a home observatory, say, and your telescope isn't going to move anywhere. You're going to have it in its own little building with a roll-off roof and stuff like that. So go ahead, if you got the money, go knock yourself out and buy a 14 or a 16-inch telescope, because you're not going to have to move it. But you don't want to be hauling that thing out, because a 14-inch, the tube alone is probably going to weigh close to 100 pounds. And then the tripod to go with it is going to be another 50, 60 pounds to take with it. So a telescope that's going to work for you. So kind of touched on this all there. Where are you going to use it? Are you going to use it at home? You're going to take it in your car? Where are you going to keep the telescope when you're not using it? Are you going to keep it down in your basement, hauling it up and down the stairs every time? Well, you might, if you're doing that, you might want to pick a smaller telescope, not one that weighs, 50, 60 pounds, that you don't want to be hauling up and down the stairs. And how old are you and how strong are you? Because the bigger the telescope, the more it's going to weigh. And do you want to try astrophotography? I don't recommend astrophotography for a beginner, because it is a very, very steep learning curve.
And expensive.
And it's expensive too. And then, next point, how much money you want to spend? People ask me, how much is a good telescope? And I said, well, how much money you got? So, you can buy a nice, 6-inch Dob for, $400 or $500. Or you can buy a Schmidt Cassegrain, an 8-inch on a motorized go-to mount for, $2,500, $3,000. Now, it's again, how much you're willing to spend, and are you going to use it? We see a lot of people buy telescopes and then they find they don't use them and they just sit in the closet, and they end up on Kijiji or on Facebook Marketplace or something like that. So, all personal questions. And what do you like to look at? Do you like to look at the moon and planets? You don't have to go out of the city to look at the moon and the planets. They're bright enough. You can see them well within the side of the city. If you want to look at galaxies and faint nebulae, you got to get out of town. So you're going to have a scope that's going to that you can easily transport. So if you've got a smart car, you don't want to be going and buying a 12-inch telescope, because it's never going to fit in there, right? So,
Hey, roof rack, maybe.
well, yeah, I don't know if you want to put your telescope on the roof. Anyway. So, here's a few sample starter telescopes, and these are manual telescopes. I've revised some of the prices. This is a PowerPoint from last year that Luca Vanzella did, so I've revised a little bit of them. So the Celestron first scope is the one on the left. It's 76 millimeter. Actually, I have one here.
Also called
I'll show it
tabletop
after.
telescope.
I'll show it after. They're $100. You sit them on a tabletop. They're a Dob mount, and pretty simple. They're great for looking at the moon, planets. They are a little tough to aim. I did buy a red dot finder for it. They're a fun little scope, and they're easy to carry. You can take them anywhere. Next one is Skywatcher Heritage 130 millimeter. Nice size. It's currently the local telescope store in town is called All Star Telescope. They're on the south side, just south of 34th Avenue on Parson Roads. It's currently on sale for $320, regular $370. Next one is Skywatcher 102 millimeter refractor. It's $450. That's the current price today. I just went to All Stars website and got these prices off it. So these are all on Altaz mounts. They're all manual mounts. They're all, good telescopes for a starter. And then there's these beginner tracking scopes with little motors in them. And we have a Celestron 4-inch MacCat compound telescope. It's on a tripod. You turn it on, you align it, and it'll track. And it does have a go-to feature once it's aligned. And it's currently selling for $780. And there's a Skywatcher 102, basically the same size as the Celestron, also on a tripod. It's also go-to, and it's on sale right now for $780. Now, there is this new scope. I've never actually seen one or even I haven't seen it in use. It's called the StarSense Explorer that Celestron brought out about 2 years ago now. And they use a smartphone. You attach it to your telescope and use the camera's or the phone's camera to take a picture of the sky, and then it communicates with the scope and tells it where it is and what it's looking at, and then it kind of acts like a go-to telescope. I've never used one. I have no idea how well they work, but I have read reviews in Astronomy magazine, and apparently they work not too bad, but they will suck all the life out of your phone, and particularly in cold weather. And I don't know. That's all I can say about those, but I do see them advertised in the astronomy magazines, and there are the prices. Those prices are in US dollars from the ads. And for Dobsonians, they are reflector telescopes, as I say. You can get an 8-inch Orion for $650 US. Or you can buy a Skywatcher 6-inch or an 8-inch for, $620, $880, so like $700, $900. And then there's the Skywatcher, and those are collapsible telescopes for space savings, for throwing in the back of your car. You actually loosen these. There's these knobs here, and the front part of the telescope actually pushes down for storage. And then when you set it up, you loosen them and pull it out again. And so it's a collapsible telescope. And they're over $1,000, but they do save on space. And then you have your Dobsonian with the tracking mounts. Clayton told about him. You have the Skyscan type?
No, mine is an Orion telescope.
Okay, it's probably the same deal though, right?
Yeah, but it doesn't have the motorized. This is what Jay has in a 16-inch.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, okay. Well, there's the motorized Dobsonians. And so you're looking at over, $2,000 and up for one of those things.
Very, very heavy, the knob base on that thing. You have to basically put it together on site, because it is, if you were to build the base on that 16-inch and try to carry it, it's going to take 2 people to carry it.
Right. Yeah, because it's got the motors in it.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, and any motorized telescope, you need to bring a power source with it, a battery pack. Some telescopes that are motorized have internal batteries, but I find they don't last very long.
Not on a cold night.
Not on a cold night. So I use battery packs to power my telescope, and they'll last for quite a while.
Yeah, they're called power tanks. And
power tanks, yeah.
Yep.
And then there's the Altas computerized telescope. This is a Celestron. They have the Next Star series, and they start at $1,000 for a 4-inch and go above 2,000 for an 8-inch. But
Very,
they sit
very
on
good telescopes.
they're extremely good telescopes. We do have some in our loaner program, and I'll talk about that right at the end. And for astrophotography, I guess the 4-inch for $1,000 is a simple way to get involved in photography. But of course, you need a camera, and astronomical imaging cameras start at a few $100s and go for,
How
your
much
first,
money do you want to spend?
how much more money, or throw in your firstborn son to
Yeah.
get that. And then there's all the software you need to process the images, and some of the software are good imagers use. It ain't cheap either. There are free programs online, but the good imagers, they use some fairly expensive software programming. Taking the picture is probably the easy part. It's the
Well,
processing that makes the image come out. So
depending on I mean, taking the picture when you're, just say, taking the Andromeda Galaxy, for example, or the Orion Nebula, your camera and your scope going to be tied up for a few hours taking multiple images. That's why you want a tracking scope, because what
Yeah.
you see as a visual observer through the telescope when you look at the Andromeda Galaxy is a gray smudge. That's all it looks like, just a gray smudge against the dark sky. Those pictures we see on TV, on the internet, and the magazine, those have been taken what they call multiple exposure. They are stacked. Some of them, maybe get away with 100, but we're literally talking thousands of exposures stacked on top of one another, and then processed through all the special software to get the color and the image that we see on the internet and the magazines.
well, there you go. I'm not an astrophotographer. So.
Neither am I. and my wife would kill me if I started spending the money to do that.
yeah. I've thought about it, or as I sometimes refer to it, going over to the dark side and going into astrophotography. But anyway.
Yeah. Jeff, this is Alistair.
Yeah.
If someone does have a question about astro imaging, they can certainly ask me. I've got, I've gone one level down the rabbit hole.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll save all those questions for you. Okay. So here is the Next Star SE. It is on an Altas mount. It can be made to track equatorially. This picture in the middle, you have an adapter that allows the motor mount that it sits on to tilt up to match our latitude, which is 53 degrees. And then you align it with the pole, and then it will track. You can use a DSLR with an adapter. I have taken pictures of the moon and stuff with that, but that's pretty simple. Just, click and away you go, right? And there's smartphone photography, and there are adapters that you can buy, because trying to hold a smartphone over an eyepiece is very, very tough. I volunteer at an observatory in Coronation Park, and I don't know how many times I've watched people stand there for minutes on end trying to get an image to focus on their phone before they finally give up. But you snap these things on the end of the eyepiece holder, and supposedly can get a picture.
Not too bad. I've got one. Yeah.
Yeah, I got one too, because one of these pictures is mine, the one on the right, and I took out with a BlackBerry. Yeah. Well, I've switched to a Samsung now. So anyway, so there's a few iPhone, cell phone pictures. There's an iPhone picture of the moon. All moon pictures. Taking pictures of planets is pretty tough, because the phone just can't seem to adjust to the light to get it. It's either overexposed or it just doesn't see it at all. And someone's managed to take some cell phone pictures of the planets, which is really amazing. This isn't anybody we know.
No,
No,
no.
I can't see a smartphone getting the horse head. I think that's fake. Anyway, because you can't even see the horse head with your eye. So,
No.
okay, equatorially mounted computerized telescope. After all the talk about don't buy a telescope with an EQ mount. Well, here's an EQ mount, but you may notice it doesn't look anything like the Hobby Killer EQ mount. These things are big, beefy units, and they weigh a lot. And they'll have this thing here. They'll have a built-in polar alignment scope built right into the mount, so you can get down and look through this eyepiece and precisely align it with Polaris, which Polaris isn't exactly over the North Pole. It's slightly off. But once you get experience, you can get the thing aligned so it is pointing geographic north. Because if you're going to do astrophotography, it does involve long exposures. And if it isn't precisely aligned, your stars are going to start trailing. There's devices now, I think one called Polestar. It's a camera that fits into this mount here, and it'll take a picture and align it by itself. So I don't know how it works. I've heard people use them and they say they work pretty good. So, but anyway,
Electron has one, yep.
yeah, a proper equatorial mount, not a Hobby Killer equatorial mount, looks like that. It's not wobbly and and you'll notice there's no slow motion controls on this thing either. It's all motorized, and it's all driven by this hand paddle down here. So if you're serious about astrophotography, you're going to have to get one of those, and they're also very expensive. And you have to be prepared for a steep learning curve, and to buy a really, really good mount. And here are some prices on the mounts. These aren't the telescopes. Like this one here, the mount for this telescope is $4,000 with the scope. The mount costs more than the telescope here. So that's what we're talking. Now there is a Star Adventurer mount you use with the DSLR, and that's it here. Alistair's used one. You can talk about that a little bit later. I've never used it, but I understand they're quite good. So there's the package for $700. And here are some more equatorial mounted telescopes for astrophotography. And notice that, yes, they are all big and beefy units. So we have a telescope loaner program. And if you go to our website, along the navigation bar at the top, loaners, and click on that, and it'll list what we've got. And we've added since this slide was made. But we have a number of different kinds of scopes. We have small scopes, big scopes, up to 8-inch. We have a 10-inch Daub. We have an 8-inch Daub. We have an 8-inch Nexstar Celestron Schmidt-Cassegrain. So you can borrow these. You give us a deposit. You'll get it back when you return the scope, and you can borrow them for I think a month. Yeah, $40 refundable deposit. So that's something to look into if you're thinking of what scope you want to buy. You can try these out and see if they work for you. The mentioned All-Star Telescope is in town here. They're very knowledgeable, and they have very good stock. And if they don't have it, they can bring it in for you. You can talk to them.
They carry all the brand names.
Yeah, they got all the brand names. Yeah. And then there's also there's KW Scope in Ontario. I've bought stuff from them before. Ontario Telescope, Astronomy Plus, David Astro. I have not dealt with them. I can't say anything
They're in
about them.
Quebec.
Ah, okay. And then Orion or Meade, you can buy directly from them. And for used telescopes or online, you can try Astro Buy and Sell. And there's that's a Canadian astronomy buy and sell website. You have to register, but people put stuff up for sale. It's kind of like a garage sale, really. I bought stuff off them, and I've never had any problems with them. Canadian Telescope Astronomy Buy and Sell. It's a Facebook group. And there's Amazon, Best Buy, Costco. But you have to watch out for third-party marketplace sellers. Like sometimes Amazon or even Costco have good scopes, but they also have hobby killers. So you just have to watch yourself. And then, of course, there's Kijiji, where a lot of bad telescopes go and die. But there's some good stuff on Kijiji too.
Oh, yeah.
And we're not going to review any websites. So we're going to have an Astro Cafe. Oh, this is last year's title.
We don't know the date yet.
We don't know the date yet. We're going to have a how to use a telescope. We were talking about it, doing it online, but maybe we'll do it in person. But it'll show up on our website when we're ready. So, oh, geez, there's my ugly mug there. Okay. So we'll ask questions, but first I'm just going to do one more thing before that. I'm going to stop share for a second, and then I'm going to share again. Okay, so this is Kijiji here, just like right now. Now, these are all commercial stuff at the top. So what do we got here? Celestron telescope, with telescope spelt wrong. Says it's in mint condition. It's on an equatorial mount. I don't know. I think I'd stay away from that one.
Yeah. Scope might be okay to mount it.
Yeah. Oh, geez, I went too far back. I got this bar in the way here. Sorry about that. Okay. Tasco telescopes, we call Tasco the Tasco fiasco, or so yeah, stay away from there. And it's got the outrageous box. Questar telescope, I think that's a Mac Cat on a motor mount.
Yeah, when you look at $4,500.
Yeah. So this is a 4-inch Celestron on a motorized mount. $600. Tasco, $35. Paying too much for that. Celestron Power Seeker. Again, it's on an equatorial mount. The scope is probably pretty good, but I stay away from those. Watch the Stars. This is a Bushnell.
Kind of looks like the one you had.
Yeah, it looks like the one I have on a Alt-Az mount. Celestron Travel Scope, $200. 80 millimeter on an Alt-Az mount. That might be pretty good.
That looks more like a spotting scope to me.
Yeah, okay.
And
Skywatcher. This is a very good telescope. This is just
Very
a
good.
scope only. You're going to have to buy a mount for it. Celestron Inspire. I see these at Canadian Tire, and I'm rather leery of them, just because they're a Canadian Tire. But yeah, $240. I think they're cheaper.
like you have the one I saw today at Canadian Tire.
Yeah, $75. A Zommel. Never heard of it. It's on an EQ mount again. There's your 4-inch Next RSE. That's a good telescope to start with. This one, I don't know. This one, let's see what this is. It's new in the box. 600. Oh, wait, this is a copy of an ad. He's showing the Finderscope on this thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. And is this going to send me? No, it's going to send me right back to the top again. Oh, here's a good one. Collapsible tube, $1,100. That's a good scope. And this one, I wouldn't buy that.
Nah.
Skywatcher 10-inch Daub. Yeah, $1,000. That's a pretty good price. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, it's mostly misses, but there are some hits on Kijiji. You can also try Amazon Marketplace. So that's just some ideas. So I'll just close that. Stop my share. Yeah. Okay. You got anything to add, Alice or Clayton?
I'll just show that crappy one I had down here.
Sure.
I'll just give you a quick look at what it looks like. It's not much. So basically, that's the box that came in, and you can see here they're promoting the 400 power. It's only a 60mm aperture in here. Just just an alt asthma mount, and it doesn't look too bad when you look at the picture. It's called a Galileo, hoping that somebody will think, well, Galileo was pretty smart, so maybe it's a good time. No, not. So the actual telescope is there. So this is all wood. These are a wooden mount. You have to tie this into the alt asthma. I guess if you want to call it its mount. These are a screw on each side that you have to be able to get it to tilt up and down. Here's your finder. There's one of those 965 plastic eyepieces. Excuse me. It does turn quite well. It doesn't move very well. But if you want to change the tilt angle, you have to loosen at least one of those two screws, move the telescope up and down, which way you want to go. And as soon as you tighten it up, whatever you were pointing at, you've just lost it. So it is not really what I would call that is a hobby killer. Because once you bump it, it starts to, you get this shaking in it, and it takes a few seconds for it to shut down. And after it does that, and you look through the eyepiece, or if you touch the eyepiece, you've lost your target. So it's not really a telescope that you would want to have. And I don't even know where that came from. I found it in my dad's basement one day and brought it home and was looking at it, and I said, oh my God, not good.
Okay. Anything you want to add, Alistair? Or well, any questions?
Yeah, we've got questions. You're muted, Alistair.
I was just going to say questions first.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I'll jump in with my first ones unless someone else is quicker.
Yeah, go ahead.
So one of the things I was thinking of was a tabletop Dobsonian as a first telescope. What I'm a little concerned about is the tabletop aspect. So if I'm in my yard and I don't have a solid table, am I crawling around on the ground, or am I putting it on a Rubbermaid tote that's going to be too wobbly? What's the likelihood that will work out well for me, or should I just scrap that plan and start looking for a different first scope?
You need a solid table.
Yeah. Actually, I have seen those first scopes actually on a mount, on a tripod. You can actually get a tripod for them.
Okay.
Probably more than the scope, though.
Yeah, the real advantage of the tabletop stuff is the being able to take it on a trip to the mountain parks, and where there's always going to be a robust picnic table.
Right.
But yeah, you've made the correct diagnosis of
Okay.
yeah. If you put it on an upside down tote bin, it's not.
There's a little wobble there.
Yeah.
That's going to
Yeah.
be frustrating.
Yeah, yeah, and being comfortable when you're looking through a telescope allows you to see a lot more. Even telescopes with eye height eyepieces, I always recommend people to have a step ladder there that you can hang on to, because
Yeah.
without that hanging on, you don't realize how much your body is sort of swaying, and brain has to work overtime to try and keep your body straight, and so you're not paying attention to what you're looking at. So yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah.
Jeff has one in his
Yeah,
hands right now.
this is a first scope. It's on a little Dob base. Swings up and down, and it's got 1.25-inch eyepieces, and the eyepiece that came with it isn't that great, but I could use one of my better eyepieces.
One of my other questions you're just about to answer right here, but a
Right.
shoddy eyepiece versus a quality eyepiece, what's the actual impact to me, the user? Like a shoddy one, it's hard to get aligned to see correctly, or it's just going to be like frail and fall apart on me if I
don't know if this is going to show, but okay, so this is a 20 millimeter eyepiece, and from a cheap one, right? So see how small that hole is, and this is a similar. Look how much bigger an area you have for your eye to look at.
Yeah, that's way different, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, the good news is that a reasonable beginner eyepiece, $60 or $70, a more reasonable, next level two, they're 130 to 150, and then very quickly they climb. But the other thing that I think is really important for the starting out is, in a way, not to go overboard. Like, don't try for a high end instrument, because some people find out later that they just can't relax. They're get up and go busybody stuff, and in astronomy you're just taking it real nice and easy. So the part of the idea is get something that's reasonable at the start, with reasonable eyepieces, and you'll be able to learn with them. One of the strange things about starting astronomy is that your brain is not wired to understand what it's looking at. The moon is not too bad, but often with the planets and star fields, your brain just sort of goes, I don't know what I'm looking at. And it takes a bit of actual training to get up to a point where you're seeing detail. Like, if the two of us look through the same telescope, moments after the other, I would see way more detail than you, simply because I've trained. And that's just time at the eyepiece. And so in a way, if you start with really high-end eyepieces, you're probably not going to get a lot out of them anyways, because you're in sort of training. Those sort of middle reasonable quality eyepieces are sort of just fine when you're starting out. The type of thing that we recommend is especially the loaner program, or go to TELUS World of Science on the Friday and Saturday nights. Jeff here is one of the hosts, and spend a few evenings over the months looking through the telescopes there, and you'll find out very quickly whether your character is suited to the enjoyment and the peace of looking through a telescope and just sort of getting used to standing around in the cold.
That's great. Thank you.
The other thing that we will be restarting up, especially in spring, is a sort of casual in-town stargazing at the observatory, where people can bring a new telescope that they can't figure out. I do these things to help people get over those first hurdles, because quite often astronomy is not difficult, but it's not intuitive, and it sometimes just takes a helping hand to get over those first couple of hurdles. And oh no, you just need to do it this way, and it's like, oh. We get a lot of, that's what they meant on the YouTube. Okay, now I got it. So we do that as well. And so that, yeah, at the observatory there is a really good place to get that, build that sense of looking at the sky and starting to ramp up your observing skills. And again, look, just knowing what's available. Oh, the moon, the craters, what the planets look like. You'll get a very good sense of that.
Something we didn't touch on in this How to Buy a Telescope was the role of binoculars. And we have a comment from one of our RASC Edmonton members about binoculars. And he writes, as said by Alistair, look through scopes at a stargazing event before buying a scope. Even before that, give consideration to your first telescope actually being a pair of handheld telescopes, otherwise known as a binocular, and a decent stargazing app. Some decent apps are even free. Get a good binocular you can use for daytime holidays, hikes, and nature watching that is decent for stargazing, sky watching. Budget at least $300. If you can splurge for $500, you can get even better and have something that may last a lifetime instead of wearing out. They are more complex internally than many telescopes, and good does not come cheap. Good ones are worth treating well. Learn how to do that too. If astronomy turns out not to be your thing, or the thing of whomever you are gifting the binocular, it can still be useful for other activities or for resale, unlike most bargain telescopes.
Perfect. I'm on the loaner program wait list for a month or two now, or I just got on the list, but I'm excited for when it comes up for my name, so that'll be good. And the evenings at the Tell Us World of Science sounds great too.
Yeah, just check, make sure we're open, because
Okay.
I'm really surprised that we've been open every Saturday in November, because the weather in November is usually terrible.
Weather was good, and it's clear nights off, and we've been having
so
a pretty nice time.
Every Saturday they say are going to be open next Saturday. So I don't know, depends on the weather. But so I don't know what the forecast is for Saturday, but we'll see. But if it's cloudy out or below -10, then we don't open. So.
Oh, the other thing is we have a Facebook page for the Edmonton area, and that's also a great place to ask questions. And a few of the people, I show up there every now and then, Jeff and Clayton also, and so every now and then it's very easy to get very good feedback and advice. No, don't go for that.
Yeah. Oh, and then we have the what's up, if you want to know what to look at. I do a thing every month. I did it yesterday for December, and it's on our YouTube channel now. So, and you'll get a big heaping helping of space history too. So.
I was curious about, you described setting up your Finder and your collimating activities, maintenance work kind of a thing. Is that is that a beginning of each evening before you get going, or is that like every month or two, or every time you drove around on a rough road? How often are you recalibrating and checking your equipment?
I do mine every time because my scope is, as you saw in that picture of me standing beside it, my family room there, it has the truss mounts on it, right? And even the ones that they were showing on the Skywatcher that collapse, each time you collapse it and bring it back up, it's not going to be perfectly where it was the last time you did it. So technically, I would recommend you collimate your scope every time you set it up, because I have my trusses that I put in the same place every time. So the ones that are facing me, the same trusses go all the way around the scope, so that if there's any difference in the size of them, at least it's going to be somewhat constant. And I've actually had a point where I've taken it out, put it on, and it's within, I mean, we're talking almost collimated already. But other times I got to screw in the primary, pull it back out and go through it again. But it's less than 5 minutes with a laser collimator. And it's something you should do because you're going to see your images are going to be in focus. They're going to be brighter and you'll be able to get more detail out of them.
Yeah, one of the analogies I like to use with collimation is, well, if you remember TVs when they were cathode ray tubes instead of 4K liquid crystal, is that if you don't collimate, you're going to get a standard sort of TV image, which is okay, but to realize that most of these instruments can deliver the 4K quality if you spend just a few minutes at the start of the session to adjust it. It's also similar to tuning a guitar or a violin. It's one of those things where to a complete beginner, it says, oh, I don't want to touch these knobs. And then once you get used to it, it's also, yeah, dun, done.
Yeah, one of the things on my scope I did for the secondary is you're supposed to use a screwdriver or an Allen key to adjust the secondary mirror. And I was always worried I'd drop it and it would land on the primary mirror. So I got something called Bob's knobs, and they're plastic knobs that you take the screws out and you put these little plastic screw knobs in their place. So now they're just little plastic knob that you're turning with your fingers, no tools required, which makes it a lot better.
Yeah, that's a cool idea. I like that too.
Yeah.
If anyone else has questions in the crowd, I'm sorry, I'm not meaning to monopolize. I just had a bunch that I wrote down. One more technical and then one subjective, but the storage and transport. I see there's a question in the chat. The storage and transport. So I assume I've got my new telescope. If I'm going to put it somewhere, I'm putting it back in the box in a styrofoam or however I got it. So it's well protected. And then I'm heading out to go places. And that's probably the best storage for a newbie that doesn't want to fork over lots for a big fancy case.
Yep. The original packing is usually the best way to go.
Yep. The one thing to be careful of, and it doesn't matter what type of telescope you have, but if it's -10 or even -5 outside and you come indoors, if you wear glasses, they just they fog up. And what often happens when you bring it, or if they're -20, it'll frost up, and then the frost will melt. It'll turn into water drops, and then they'll run down, and it's really not a good thing. So before you bring a telescope in, always put the caps on, put it in the box, and then you're fine to bring it inside, because it'll warm up very gradually to room temperature and everything will be just fine. But you really don't want to bring something very cold indoors and have it frost over. If it does, especially the refractors, they do get frost on the front lens. Just a gentle hair dryer from a foot away, just waft hair dryer at it, and you'll see the frost will evaporate away, and then you're fine.
Yeah. The
And
other
then
thing
cap
too,
it.
yeah, the other thing too is when you take, if you're storing your scope inside the house and you're going to go out and it's say 5, 10 below, you're going to want it to acclimatize itself to the weather. You want your optics to be the same temperature as the air around it. So that's why you saw on some of those reflectors, they had the little fan on the back to help cool the mirror down faster. So when you go out, you might have to wait a half an hour, 45 minutes before the optics cools down to the ambient temperature.
Oh, another thing about the weight, seeing the weight on paper is very deceptive. You think, oh, 30 pounds. Poof. You know, I pick those up at the gym, no problem. Well, it's another thing when you've got bare hands, you're holding a metal tube and it's -10 and it's a precision optical instrument, and suddenly 30 pounds it's like it's a baby, you don't want to drop it. And if you have to carry it downstairs, it's like a bigger telescope suddenly becomes a lot more of a problem than you might think. So that's another really good advantage to, say, going to the showroom at All Star Telescope and asking for permission. It's like, can I just pick this up? And to feel the weight of it's a really good idea.
And also all the weight, most of the weight is going to be all on one end too. So it's going to be awkward.
Yeah. My big scope, I leave it in the front foyer. But to my wife's chagrin.
It's quite the ballet getting a telescope on a tripod through the kitchen door and the screen door to the deck and back.
Yeah.
I can picture it now. Yes. My last question for you is, so if I am looking at, like, within my budget, I can look at larger aperture with fully manual, or I could look at a smaller aperture, not going below the 3-inch mark, but getting something like Star Sense, where I've got a bit of guidance to find the right targets. So this again, your points of go try it out is probably the right thought, but
Yep.
my curiosity was, am I likely to get more times out and having a nice time if I'm looking at the moon, but with a large aperture and just sort of enjoying looking really closely? Or is it likely that I'm going to actually want to, within the city, I'm probably not heading out often out of town, get a Star Sense with a 3-inch that I can find a bunch of things because it's going to help me find them. So yeah, I'm kind of thinking about the larger aperture manual, look at the moon and really, really get joy from that. But understanding that maybe that all changes when I go and try out a few different things and see what I like.
Yeah, and it's really tough because no one knows ahead of time what their real interest is. But the other sort of shock that comes after a year or two of astronomy is, I need a second telescope or even a third telescope, and we often have two that are, one is sort of a grab and go, something that's fairly small on a tripod, simple to use, that I could just, crescent moon and Venus. Whoop. And then you've got another telescope that, it takes me 10 minutes to set up, and there's trees in the way. I'd have to go to the park down at the end of the block. So there is no one does it all. So it's a really tough question. But the most important part is it's the thing that you'll use the most. And of course, you don't quite know that at the start, but usually the easier to set up, the faster to set up, the more you'll use it. And so, that's why, generally some of those go-to motorized are very nice. The challenge with those is that the precision can be limited depending on how you set it up, and the precision of the mechanics themselves. And I've often helped people where, I can't find this object and it's just outside of the field of view. And because they're beginners, they didn't know whether they could see something, or is it the light pollution or not. And so the motorized stuff, it's not a nice simple answer.
No, makes sense. I think it's good to get some hands-on to try both and then see how it works. It's a like you say, it's a complicated answer, and you end up with 3 telescopes. But maybe I'll test out a few before we go there.
Like those SEs on the one arm computerized ones. It's, if you're familiar with stuff, they're a joy to use. It's just, if you're generally a beginner and something isn't quite right, then it's I don't know where to start. And so, well, it helps to have people like ourselves in town who can get you through those. But the thing with the push tos as well is that you're spending time adjusting rather than have the machine actually motorize and let you look. So it's, to me, you can't go wrong with a 4 or 6 inch SE. That's the motorized one, or the little, any of the motorized go-to. You just need to know every now and then that something you're looking for might be just outside of the field of view. But if you're looking at Saturn or the moon or Jupiter, it's pretty obvious if it's just outside the field of view. Oh yeah, it's there. But yeah, I think you can't really go wrong. So if you've got the budget, I'd go for the motorized one, because then you can just spend your time just looking.
Thank you, and thank you all so much. Really enjoyed this presentation.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah. Now, another thing you might stir it if you're interested in too, is that astronomy isn't just relegated to nighttime viewing. A bunch of us are also into what we call solar observing, which means we're looking at our sun. And I'm just going to share my screen here again quickly, just to show you. This is my current stable of telescopes that I have. And what you can see, I got my big Dob here. This is what they call a personal solar telescope. Then I got my big binoculars for solar filters on them. So if you look at these filters, this is an offset. So basically it's blocking out 99.9% of the light coming through. So if you're want to watch the solar, the sunspot, this is going to allow you to see the sunspot by having them on my binocular and also on my big scope. This scope being a dedicated hydrogen alpha scope, you're only seeing hydrogen wavelength. It allows you to see the prominences, filaments that are on the surface of the sun. So again, like I said, it's not something that you need to get into. I just think doing solar observing in the daylight when the temperature's a hell of a lot warmer than 30 below, it's another way to go. So I just thought I'd throw that in. Those solar filters are you got it. You cannot look at the sun with a telescope without those solar filters. Yeah, and they got to go on the objective. They used to come out where they have the filter on the eyepiece. No, not a good thing.
Yeah.
Make sure it's on the objective, the front end of the scope.
Yeah. I have a PST also, and here I'll just.
You'd basically be looking at an accessory for, if you have one of the mainstream telescopes. You'd look at All-Star Telescope or someone who has a filter to match your unit, and then you could do that and do solar watching. Okay.
Exactly.
So that's a picture I took through my PST. I processed it through Photoshop and stuff to bring out more detail, but hydrogen alpha scopes can see a lot more than what we call the white light filters, which just show sunspots. But you can see prominences around the edges. You can see filaments. You can see active regions here, these white things. So yeah, that's what you're going to see in a hydrogen alpha scope. And the PST is, even though it's a very small scope, it's only 40 millimeter. It gives really, really good views.
Oh yeah. Yeah, like
Yeah, but just to point out, what that small solar telescope is not an accessory. It's a self-contained unit, and
Yeah.
they're 800-900. So
Well, they're over 1,000 now. When
Yeah,
I
it
bought
was.
mine, it was like 500, but that was about 10 years ago, but they've really gone up in price.
yeah, amazing views,
Yep.
to be sure.
Yeah.
We
Now,
have a dedicated solar scope at the deck, a hydrogen alpha. It's a 6-inch Lund. I think we paid
big.
like, how much did we pay for that? 15?
16 grand.
Yeah. Okay.
But
Anyway,
it's a double echelon on it, so it's a
yeah,
double
yeah,
stack. Yeah.
yeah.
So
But it's only for looking at the sun.
yeah.
So
And here's what the white light filter gives you when you're looking at the sun.
Okay.
That's actually the sun today. Those are the sunspots that are out there right now. And you see this big one here? That was responsible for a fairly significant coronal mass ejection a couple days ago. So tonight and tomorrow, you might want to be taking a look at the northern sky to look for some aurora.
Yep. But the other sort of philosophical approach is, hey, don't worry, you've got another 60, 70 years of life. It's a lot of time to explore this stuff. There's really no need to rush in. A lot of people also start with binoculars, but even them, well, mostly because a lot of people already have binoculars, but some people find them just very sort of inconvenient and when looking up at the stars. So those things take a bit of practice too. But if you have them, hey, give them a try.
Oh yeah, definitely. I've got a set of Celestron 20 by 80, which means it's got an 80 millimeter optical or aperture in the front, and I get a 20 times magnification through them. And they're good for looking at star clusters and globular clusters and stuff like that, better than some telescopes, that's for sure. Get a wider
But
angle of view. Yeah.
I would never recommend that for a beginner.
No. Those things are heavy. Darn heavy.
Oh, and one other difference, you'll probably be seeing quite a few of these sort of digital telescopes that'll show you things in color in near real time. But one of the things that the consequence of it is what you're looking at ends up being your smartphone or a computer screen. So there's a loss in the experience. It's really a different experience to your brain looking at something as opposed to as in looking through a telescope as opposed to just looking on a screen.
Yeah, here I'll just show you here my what my binoculars look like, and I have them on a mount like that so that I can raise and lower it for whoever wants to look, and it kind of stays focused on the on your target, stays online all the time. Doesn't miss.
okay.
Okay. So like Jeff mentioned earlier, keep an eye on our website for sometime in probably late January. We'll be running the how to use the telescope you got for Christmas. So you can take it out of the closet where it's been since Christmas and bring it. And like I said, we want to do this one in person so we can do hands-on. So we can, we'll let you know where it's going to be. You come on down to that location and there will be people there to help you explain how to use your telescope, how to set it up. We'll do demonstrations on how to collimate your scope and the different method and basically answer all your questions. So when you go away, when you go home, you'll be really excited about giving it a shot.
You might even have coffee.
That would most likely we'll have coffee. Maybe even donuts too.
Ooh,
Mm.
okay.
Any,
You're moving, your lips are moving, but we can't hear you, Alistair.
Sorry. Just a concluding remark. Thank you for joining us, and you know where to find us. This is not the only time you get to ask questions. We're available year round. So please go ahead, go out there. If you're confused or need more answers, we're here.
Yeah, or you can come to our meeting and meet us in person. Our next one's on the 11th, I think.
I
Yep.
think
Yeah,
the 11th.
11th. I think Chris Hurd is talking.
Ooh.
He's involved with the Mars sample return mission, and I think he's doing something with the moon too. So, yeah.
Okay. I'll say goodnight.
Okay.
Okay,
Thanks,
thanks,
Alistair.
Alistair.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thanks everybody, and
Stuart, you got a
thanks,
question?
Clayton. Thanks, Ed.
No, I was trying to do the clapping button. So it's
Oh,
Oh.
okay.
Okay.
It looks-
All right.